Mr. Distinguished delegates and all the paper presenters here, students from the Institute of Management, Raipur. It's a great honor and privilege that the organizers have given us to come and share our views on humanitarian logistics. I'm grateful indeed. Friends, as in the opening remark, Chairperson has mentioned about the citizen's concern. So I'll draw my line from there, that how a citizen is concerned about when a volume and uncertainties, both things he have touched upon. One is that when we are dealing with disaster, it's a question of uncertainties. He was taking class, he didn't know that something will happen, and all of a sudden news came that a lot of rains and you have to abandon the class. So this is the uncertain kind of a move. So disaster is normally uncertain most of the time, other than the slow onset of disaster, which is drought. Now, coming to this analogy, how we are going to draw up the humanitarian logistic theory and the principle and the modeling. Now, one is this, that first analogy which I would like to draw and the concern which I would like to raise, where Professor Agnihatri has left, that how this kind of uncertainties can be brought in the planning of logistic management. If there is a management principle, if there is management modeling, normally we go by the everything remaining constant kind of a principle in economics as well as in management. And when we talk about crisis, is normally the financial crisis and the market crisis are undertaken in the management principle, but not at the disaster which creates crisis, whether it's a market or whether it's a business continuity or is so all three, that how our theory, model, or this entire discourse going to actually incorporate those into the planning process. When we talk about disaster, why it is important? Because it is related with right to life. In the morning we talk about this right to food, right to entitlement, right to water and everything. But it begins from the constitutional guarantee, that is right to life, and that too with dignity. So the moment we say right to life with dignity does not mean only when the everything remaining constant. Right to life with dignity should also be taken care of in the time of crisis. So as long as that we are providing food, shelter, water to the people, it's also important that how we are ensuring that water, food and shelter to the people who are into crisis. When people are in distress, we require much more attention than what is in the normal condition. So there I would like to say that what is the nature of the crisis which is appearing before us when we are actually modeling, planning and doing something. The first which we have to say that it's not a kind of a event or the phenomena of 10 years and one incident. It's now got the reverse one, is 1 year and the 10 disasters. So kind of a frequency as well as the intensity. Management principle might say that yes, it's why to bother about this if things are happening in 10 years of time or 50 years of time or 100 years of return period. But that analogy has to be broken here and could be considered that now the frequency and intensity has increased. And we have to have a kind of a pan-India or pan-South Asia or pan-region kind of a modeling that should help taking care of this kind of a concern. So the volume of the people who are getting impacted after any disaster, this, if you see this last 3 disasters in the country, the volume has multiplied manyfold. Although the number of people died had declined substantially, it's a great success of science and technology, but important enough to look at those things which are actually have to be addressed now. That is kind of a people who are affected and living in distress. Large number of people to be evacuated. So if we say that 5 million people to be evacuated, the number is not a small number. What kind of a management principle which we can bring in, which can talk about the dissemination of information, the transport arrangement, taking out people there from the safely and putting them into the safe shelters and so on and so forth. Everything, the forward and the backward linkages, that once you receive the information, what are the logistics arrangement which we have to do? This we have to take into account. The second is intensity of disasters have also multiplied manyfold. Earlier the disaster intensity was different and now the intensity is different. So that how we are going to address the intensity, whether we talk about climate change, with climate change or without climate change. whatever is happening, the intensity because of the urbanization process and some of the kind of a development process. The development is not taking account of the risks which we are creating every day. Whether we create infrastructure, whether we are creating development kind of services or development infrastructure, that is also not incorporating disaster per se in terms of mere acknowledgement of the fact is also not there that yes, we have to make a resilient infrastructure. So that has made our task much more challenging. So the large number of casualties and last, as you said, that the debris and other things are disposal. So that debris disposal would also become a challenge in terms of the kind of a logistic management. The third important thing is when we talk about the context. Meaning thereby when we talk about context, we cannot see one disaster and plan one model and that would be kind of a all applicable model. Suppose we are talking about earthquake, you have an entirely set of different things are required. And accordingly you have to plan your model that what is the supply chain and the forward linkages and the backward linkages to be planned. If we talk about hydrometeorological disaster, you have to see entirely different. So that point which I am trying to flag this, that how hydrometeorological disaster be dealt. Suppose we talk about the transportation as an issue and a hydrometeorological disaster we are taking. Still, 100 years ago, also when we had helicopter initially started with, that time also we were having this food distribution through helicopters. Even today, those land which is not accessible, still we are finding out and we are dropping food from the helicopter. I am giving this just as an example. And the cost of the packet, if you calculate, and flying a helicopter for say 2 hours or 3 hours and dropping how many packets of food, and if you do the cost analysis, I have done that, but I'm just not figuring it out. It's an expensive item. But we say that humanitarian response, it is important, that cost is not important, benefits are much more important. But how the mechanism had to be corrected in terms that leading to food riots. In many of the places in disaster or the stress, it is not actually evenly distributed. Those who are powerful can get access to the food and those who cannot, they cannot get the access. So here the theory of equity and equality gets totally destroyed or kind of by the humanitarian suppliers. So point which I'm trying to make is that women, the children, if we are dropping food there, you must have seen on the television that people are running for the food. So those who can access, able person, they can do, and others who are not able, they cannot access those food. So how we are making sure that the distribution pattern, distribution mechanisms are corrected in terms of various disasters. The third is this geographical location where we are planning for. It's not that the plain area will have the similar kind of a modeling will do in the hilly area. You have seen Uttarakhand. And in Uttarakhand also that government of China and government of also Russia wanted to give some logistic support to government of India. Government of India said that we need some helicopters to fly there. Now what happened, then when a helicopter was to be given, government of India said hang on for some time, because the government of India had adequate kind of a fleet there. And only limited number of fleet can be operated during that time. And that too, they were not flying with the kind of ATS services. They are just kind of as you drive on the roads, the same way they were driving. So they are very, very risky area and very risky transport. So even if you ask for help, that cannot be applied for the actual kind of a thing. So it's very, very important to make a correct assessment of the need and also that correct deployment of the at the different geographical locations. That is very, very important when we are talking about. The second, I would highlight and reiterate my point. When the tsunami occurred in 2004, and 2004, a lot of humanitarian assistance was to be given to the Andaman Nicobar Island. And there, we were grappling with this at the Home Ministry, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. They wanted to supply, and they asked for the generator, and the generator was to be sent by the helicopter. Big helicopter, it could not be sent, then the big flight went, and there was landing issue came, where to land. That airport is there, it's fine, but then it was decided sent by ship. Then the ship, then the no jetty was there. So bigger size of generator cannot be offloaded there, and so there's what again came back, and so the smaller kind of so these are the things. What I'm saying is the practical thing which is emerging out when we talk about in islands, how we are going to plan our transportation mechanism. When we have to go for aerial route, what are the things which we should be looking into? And even if you go to the land route, what are the things which we should be looking into? So three things which I would like to highlight very quickly. that when we talk about humanitarian logistic or the humanitarian response, we have to have very importantly flag over the time, how we are quickly responding to the request of the any government, whether the state government or the local government. If any management principles have to be evolved, the time factor is very, very important. Every time we say that we keep complaining that our system runs very late. So here we have to provide that kind of a solution. The second is then we talk about that the quality. The time does not mean that you are compromising on the quality. We are talking about equality, and also we are talking about life with dignity. So both the things we have to take into account, that how we are ensuring quality at the time of disbursement or distributing relief material. The third important point which I would like to highlight is inclusiveness. That many of the relief or humanitarian response which I have seen in country, in India, especially gender need are not addressed. The differential needs of people are not addressed in many of the logistic management principles. So how those things are actually getting accounted at the time of planning itself, as a kind of a backward linkage, a forward linkage will go so and so forth. So how the gender needs, how the differently abled persons need can be addressed, how the access to shelter can be made, how this information can be made, how food can be made available to them. So that all have to be looked into the planning process. I'm not saying that we should be going for the more of an egalitarian approach, but definitely we should strive for a more egalitarian kind of a humanistic response. So there it is very, very important to look into. Then, especially when we're designing for South Asia and especially India, we have a very kind of a heterogeneous society. The caste, culture, political system, it's all different. If there is Congress rule government, then the logistics supply would be different by the BJP government from here. Or for X government or Y government, or if the BJP government, then so these kind of a thing, how we are going to have a system. When we design system, they actually don't account for this. If the system is designed, this kind of a political influence are reduced. So it is important when we are designing system, how we can acknowledge those things, the variations, the heterogeneity, and also the political system. The socio-political cultural environment have to be taken into account when we are talking about this, the multi-sectoral kind of a response. Then we talk about logistic, it's not one sector, it's a multi-sectoral response. Medical team has to respond differently, food department has to respond differently, the logistic department have to provide differently. So the point which I'm trying to make is this: what happens that acute supply crisis comes in. Normally we run under equilibrium. We assume that is the equilibrium. And even if we say that it's not equilibrium, there's a very less supply demand deficiency. But all of a sudden what we find that supply has become inelastic in its nature at the time of crisis. And our job is to how to remove this inelastic supply to the perfectly elastic supply. And then we strive for improving supply and supply and supply. And if that supply is not taken care of by the all the logistic management, then probably is a huge crisis. And then the media is also, media and the political parties are also very, very kind of, we say, go by the Amartya Sen theory. We say that in a democracy, it's good that accountability is there. If one party is in power, the other party is actually monitoring the whole process of logistic and the relief management. So this is a challenge, and this is a good part of the democracy also. So that taking into account, I would say just one last point in terms of the urbanization, which was flagged in the morning, that what is happening, the new risk phenomena would emerge, that 50% of the population by 2050 would be highly urbanized. So largely you will find more of a urban risk issues would emerge. So any model which we are drafting today or developing today has its longevity. And that in longevity in terms of that, what is the socio-cultural environment tomorrow would be. So if the larger urban risk is going to be there, like if we call it Delhi, and we said that in Delhi, if there is an earthquake, more than 1 lakh casualty has been estimated by IIT and all the. So 1 lakh casualty meaning thereby 10 lakhs houses would be collapsed. It's just example, 5 family in each. So 10 lakhs houses, in terms of that, if you have to go the debris clearance of 10 lakhs people, and also you have to manage the shelter and everything for the 10 lakhs people, how you are going to manage that? So then each area, like if you go to and take it to the Ghaziabad, they will say this is my prime location. You cannot go the debris. So that kind of, and even if you take it to Gurgaon, Delhi cannot take it to the Gurgaon. So there's a huge logistic issue also, that how to go for the debris management other than the humanitarian response. But I can say definitely that we can draw on our dividends. What are our dividends today? The first dividend which I would like to flag in terms of humanitarian response is that our democracy is the dividend. How to actually capitalize when defining model that in terms of the political environment. The second dividend is the experience. That governance has a huge experience along with the multi-sectoral partners. So that is the dividend where we can draw, that people have been into disaster response. How those humanitarian response partners can be brought in together in designing and development technique. The third dividend would be kind of we have now actually getting geared up in terms of the science and technology, responding. We have a very good technology developed over the years. So how to capitalize those technology in terms of the planning of logistics. And last but not the least, our economy is growing. That is also a kind of a important dividend which we can draw upon. So taking that into agenda, what are our dividends? And as Mr. Kailash Gupta and others were debating about in the morning that US has a very good food quality and that we can ensure. I was telling that why to go and look at the United States of America preserved food. In India, in the smaller villages, they have a small practices and months together we can have that food without any preservatives. Like chivda and other things which you have already, chana, and these things that you can actually think of the traditional food system which we have across the country and across this pan-India food kind of a system. So we can draw on that dividends. So thank you very much. I just wanted to say here that how this can be brought in, and maybe this is a good opportunity where this Indian Institute of Management can bring some solution where we are the buyers, we are ready to buy that. Thank you very much.